Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. We bring you thought-provoking guests and topics every week to challenge your thinking about leadership. Our aim is to help you become the leader that you wish you always had as we learn together and lead together. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm deeply honoured today to be joined by a 9-time Emmy award-winning journalist and news anchor. Jane Hanson worked for NBC for 30 years. Not to give away too much around her age, let's just call it experienced. She was the host of New York Live for NBC. She was an anchor and reporter for NBC, including at the launch of what is now known today in New York, and had her own programs such as Jane's New York, where she would explore deep under the underground of New York and everything that makes New York buzz. And the Big Apple, like everyone knows, the Big Apple is one of the most bustling cities in the world, and Jane was at the heart of that. So it's an absolute pleasure to have Jane on the show. We're going to explore some deep content today around communicating with confidence, because that's what she does. For the past 30 years, she has helped leaders and people communicate with confidence, whether it be in a media situation, facing down a camera and having the confidence to be on video, and through to improving their presentation skills. So Jane, this is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Please do say hello to our audience. And I'd love to hear a bit of the background of how you got into journalism in the first place.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you today as well. And I'm glad that you're exploring this subject, because the whole notion of communication is so terribly important. And a lot of people don't give it much thought until something happens, and then they panic and don't know what to do. So, and I'm not just talking about business. I'm also talking about our personal lives. So I grew up in a little tiny town in rural Minnesota. The name is Canby. And it used to have a town slogan, BLU, Canby and Canby. But I actually ended up leaving Canby for the big bright lights of New York City. My little town didn't even have a stoplight. It had a 4-way stop. And so when you live in a place like that, that's kind of in the middle of the prairie, in the middle of nowhere, I yearned to see the world. And one of the ways I realized I could do that was through a career in journalism. And so that is what I studied. And originally I thought I would be a writer, but then I became, when I was in college, it became very clear to me that television was the place to be. And so I became a broadcast journalist. I was fortunate enough to go to work for NBC at a very young age. In fact, I was a little green when I walked in the door, and I think they were pretty shocked when I showed up. But it was always, I consider it to have been one of the most wonderful jobs in the entire world. And what I do today is as well. The thing about journalism is you're watching history being made before your very eyes on any given day. And you never know where you're going to end up next, or who you're going to meet, or what the story is going to be. And you had to instantly become really knowledgeable about the issues. You had to ask as many questions as you possibly could. And you had to do it in a way that elicited great responses, because you had to finesse everything. Sometimes it was by using a certain kind of charm. Sometimes it was by being very brisk. Sometimes it was about being demanding. Sometimes it was just simply helping people along the way as they're talking about something that might be very, very tragic. And you need to have this real comforting and be passionate with them. So it's an amazing, amazing career. And I mean, I could tell you stories forever, but I just think that maybe we don't have enough time.
I'd love to hear a few things about what you learnt along the way, and then we'll lead up certainly towards some lessons that we'd like to share with the leaders out there, CEOs and other leaders that do find themselves in media appearances and some of the shock that happens with that. So tell us about your own journey though. So you describe yourself as coming from a town with no stop sign through to the Big Apple, and you did describe yourself as green. What did you learn in those early days being thrown in the deep end of media and journalism in one of the biggest cities in the world?
Well, I think when you're in your early 20s, you're probably a little, shall I call it, full of yourself, and you think you know everything. And so for me, it was an exciting adventure. But I think one of the strategic things that I did is I knew I was so young. I also knew that I didn't know enough history. It's like I knew what I didn't know. And so people always say that, but it's really true. So I would go to some of the people who'd been there for a very long time when I was covering a particular story about politics in New York, or maybe interviewing the mayor or whatever whatever I might be doing, I would go to a couple of the reporters that had been around for a very long time, true veterans, and I'd say, give me a little background here because I know that I need to understand this issue better than I currently do. And being thrown into the fire and thrown out to those subjects, I just thought anything that I can do to learn and get a perspective was really going to help. And I think that's true in any business that we're ever in. And it also helped me kind of cement a relationship with veterans who might have thought, what is this young kid doing here? And how is she ever going to make it? The other thing that I love about the broadcast business is doing live stuff all the time. So that was the thing. I would be out in the field and I somehow had this ability to pick up the microphone and just start talking and telling stories, which was something that was fairly a little bit unique back then because we had these live trucks that traveled all over the city and all over the huge metropolitan area that was New York and sometimes the world, because I went all over the world. But just that ability to kind of think on your feet becomes absolutely crucial and essential. And to put those words together and have them make sense without sounding like a bumbling idiot or like you don't know what you're talking about. Speaking of that kind of technology, one of my favorite stories about the tech part of it is I was at the Olympics in Greece in 2004, and we were going to broadcast live from the top of an abbey, an old abbey we'd gone to an island outside of Athens, and there were really no roads, no vehicles could get up to this abbey. And so we put all of our high-tech gear on the back of donkeys. And then the donkeys are taking these big satellite pieces of equipment and taking them up this mountain to the Abbey. And then, my poor videographers and the technicians that were with us, they're hauling this gear up these centuries-old steps to get up to the roof where we can get a signal. And then they're broadcasting live. But to me, that picture of this antiquated way of hauling equipment to be able to do this technologically beautiful images from Greece and send them back to the United States in a way that involved it kind of went through the centuries to show us where we've come from where we were. And so that was quite a wonderful moment. I've done things like you mentioned going deep underground in New York City. We decided to do it in the show that I had, which was called Jane's New York. It was a one issue show, meaning we could talk about anything we wanted. It just had to be connected to New York. Well, almost anything in the world can be connected to New York. I got them to send me to the Gobi Desert of Mongolia with the American Museum of Natural History and their dinosaurs, their rock star paleontologists on a dinosaur dig. And I went on the Queen Mary 2 on a voyage. And I went to Ireland to talk about what do you do in Ireland besides play golf? Because New York City is a huge Irish population. But going deep underground underneath New York City was perhaps one of the most exciting experiences because I was down as far underground as the Empire State Building is above ground. And there were places where they were building this tunnel that was bringing water into New York City that man had never touched before because we'd never been that far down. And I remember going down there with the then mayor, Michael Bloomberg, and his security guards are carrying all these ropes and all this stuff. And I go, what is this for? And by the way, the elevator ride to get down there was 4 minutes. So what are you doing with all those ropes? So they go, well, if something happens to that elevator, we're getting the mayor up by the ropes. I'm going, well, what about me? And they said, you're on your own. Although he was such a gentleman, I think he would have taken me with him. But to see what fabulous world there is beyond what's just on the surface was also absolutely intriguing. And bringing that to life to people, and when they were able to see it, it was eye-opening and it was things that hadn't really been done before. And so to have the opportunity to do those kinds of stories was very important to me. I also felt that a lot of what I did could promote understanding. The truth about that show, Jane's New York, was something that I dreamed up after 9/11 when, in 2001, September 11th, 2001, when New York City was obviously devastated by the terrorist attacks. And my feeling that we needed to do something to bring tourists back, to bring pride back to the city, to bring back a sense of reinvigoration, a sense of rebuilding. And so that's really where the idea for the show came from. And to show New York in all of its best moments. And I was proud and privileged to be able to do that because it gave me a real sense of bringing some inspiration and helping do exactly what I set out to do. So I'm immensely proud of that program and what we were able to do with it.
You've had some amazing experiences there, Jane. I'm so glad that you're able to have that resilience to get things done in difficult circumstances, whether it's climbing ancient steps in Greece or having those ropes there to get Mayor Bloomberg out if they needed to. Like, it's just getting the job done, but then also able to beam that back to people's houses so that they can have their eyes opened and their minds expanded. And you used a really interesting word there. You said it was about understanding. Tell me what understanding means to you.
Well, one of the things that being a journalist is, we are the conduit between a story and the reader, listener, viewer, whatever is on the other side of what we're doing. And we are setting out to tell the truth about the news as we can find it. Sometimes there's 6 or 7 or 8 sides to a story. So you've got to talk to all of those people. You also are frequently the only way somebody's going to find out information. That we're doing the story because we believe people need to know it, no matter what kind of a story it is. If it's a terrible, gruesome story about a murder, if it's a political story, if it's a feel-good story, if it's a medical story that might bring hope to people, we are the conduit. And so as such, it's a heavy responsibility at times to make sure that we're bringing the very best of the information. But at the end of the day, we're all people. And the definition of news is when something extraordinary happens to somebody ordinary. So when I'm bringing this extraordinary news to people, I want to present it in a way that not only gives them the information, but helps them truly understand, or helps them learn. And then from that, they can form their own opinions and they can understand stuff. And maybe they're going to go explore that subject a little bit more so they can learn something, especially in this world today where we are so global. The stories can maybe help even foster understanding between cultures. And I think that's super important too. On the morning of 9/11, and one of the reasons I felt so deeply about it, not only because New York was then my hometown, but I was the first person at NBC to go on the air, and we had no idea what was happening. And at first thought it was a little plane that had gone off course and hit the building by mistake on what was truly a beautiful September day, which seemed a little odd. And so as I go on the air, the only information I have is something's hit one of the World Trade Center buildings. We don't know what it is. Start talking. And so that's what I did. And we're showing pictures from our Empire State Building cameras because we had our own cameras that were also located in the World Trade Center building. And unfortunately, the engineer that was running that studio for us obviously was killed because it was way at the top of the building. But so I've got no pictures, I've got nothing. And we get somebody on the phone, a janitor who was taking out the trash in Lower Manhattan. And he said to me, this is at the very beginning, he goes, it was a big plane and it was silver and blue. And so now we knew it's an airliner of some sort and not just a small plane, of course. He said, and I swear that it sped up as it was going towards the building. It was just with the engines actually gunned. And then he goes, pray for them. They're all dead. Now, this is within 2 minutes of going on the air. And as it turns out, he was actually right. But we didn't know that then. And now I've got this thing. I'm thinking, oh Lord, this false information is going out. So I stopped him and I said, I remember his name was Anthony. And I said, Anthony, we can't speculate on what happened, but I just want you to tell me what you saw. And so he repeated his story and added a few more details and that sort of thing. And then we get him off the air. But in that moment, I thought, we've got something here. It's not over yet. And how am I supposed to tell all these people that I now have just scared to death by what we're reporting? And so it was a very tough day reporting that story. And then, watching the fires and smelling that ash and knowing that I knew people that died. We all did. And given the status of what was going on in New York today or that day, that's why it was so important for me to then say, we've got to rebuild this place. We've got to help doing what we can to find out not only what happened, but how can we bring it back to the vibrant, wonderful city that it was until that very moment. So again, that too is about once you finish the job of being the messenger, how do people stay safe? How do they get home? How do they find out information? How do they know what happened to people they loved that may have been in those buildings? Once we got through that, then it became, now what do we do? How do we live here? How do we live in this city when we've seen this awful, disastrous event happen? And that was the next step in it, because we needed to find a way to understand it and deal with it without turning into bitter, angry people.
So I can see how that inspired you, Jane, to then work on Jane's New York and that word understanding. it was like your mission and purpose to rebuild. What does it mean to be New York after what you saw in that day? The other thing I want to unpack there is, first of all, sorry for your loss, and I'm sure that it impacted you personally. But then as the journalist, you had to serve a purpose for other people to get that message into. In fact, it was beamed into people's homes all over the world. And I could almost guarantee that everyone remembers where they were when they first started to see that footage. But then you also added that you're then being the conduit of that information. How do people get home? And are their loved ones safe? Yes or no? And be the bearer of the news, but also the bearer of something that had purpose for people at that very moment. And one of the things that you said that was really interesting, I want to unpack from a leadership point of view, is when you're talking to this man on the street that saw what he saw, and you asked him not to extrapolate, not to try to guess what was going on, just report what he had seen. To me, that sounds like deep listening. There's curiosity there, but you're trying to be the conduit of truth, as you mentioned it. So you're trying to report on the truth, report on what we know, and not the speculation of the emotion running away of what it could mean. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think that is something that happens all the time, perhaps not at that scale. But when you're dealing with telling a story as a journalist, you will get many different versions. And there will be people who are trying to draw conclusions that you can't yet draw. There was no way, even though what that janitor said to me was absolutely and completely true within 2 or 3 hours, we knew that what he said in that moment was true. But I didn't know it then. And I couldn't have people going crazy with that kind of news without knowing what had happened. So I needed to rein him back in, but also in a way that wasn't going to say, oh, don't be silly. That's not true. But in a way that said, just tell us what you saw, because to speculate at this early part of this event is not good for any of us because we don't know what the truth is yet. We will get to it, but we don't have it yet. And I think that's something that leaders always need to be careful about is there will always be people speculating. There will always be people second guessing you. There will always be people who will jump to conclusions that may be not correct. And so you can't let that get in the way of you delivering the right message at the right time. And the message, I mean, maybe the message will change, as clearly this one did, but you can't deliver something when you don't know it to be the truth yet. And so it's really important that you bring it back to what's happening at that moment.
Yes, 100% the case of what happens in boardrooms all around the world in different companies and or leadership teams at different levels in an organization. You'll have different perspectives. And what you just said was to listen to those perspectives, not invalidate what they're thinking and feeling, but to understand that that's just one perspective and you need to collect all of the perspectives and then also challenge, okay, what do we know to be true?
Exactly. That's crucial.
Yeah, really great leadership lesson there already. I'd like to now bring that forward to what happens a lot with CEOs around the world and other senior executives is that they do end up in media situations where something maybe not as catastrophic as 9/11, but something has happened in their company. The share price has tanked. There's some kind of issue happening. They're in crisis management. And all of a sudden, they've got a journalist in front of them, camera pointed straight down their nose, and they've probably been through some kind of media training ready for this kind of thing, but now it's showtime. And I've been through a lot of this media training before, Jane, and one of the things that we're kind of taught is that a journalist is there to trip us up, whereas what you said before is no, a journalist is a conduit for truth. So tell us, how does a CEO in that spotlight moment where the pressure's on them, camera's looking at them, journalist has got the microphone right in front of their mouth, what advice can you give to someone that's put in that situation?
Well, this is exactly what I do today in my media training business, media and presentation training and video training, et cetera, et cetera. Having been on the other side of that and having been somebody who was a journalist for so many years, and I still do things in that space. So I can immediately tell you what questions are going to be asked of a CEO. And so what I do is, first of all, I think everyone who's in that kind of a position should do some sort of crisis communication training long before the crisis happens. What would you do if you're your stock tanks. It's possible it could. I mean, the economy these days is so crazy that there's always the possibility something could happen. So I think, first of all, you need to have media training so you know how to handle the media in general. I think that's crucial for somebody in any kind of a top position these days. The media is everywhere. And the media is not just the big television networks. It can be some of the worst examples of bad things leaders have said show up on a podcast, or they'll show up on a cable, or not a cable, maybe some kind of a digital interview that they've done just kind of off of the top of their head. And they've said something they didn't mean to say. But what's important to remember is most journalists are not out to get you. They're out to get a story. They are looking for what happened. They are also looking to perhaps, be the first person to tell that story. So they'd like to lead the story. So I think what leaders need to do is the first thing they need to do is to remain calm. Need to understand that all of the story isn't out there yet. All of the facts are not known. I think you should be honest about something like that. Let's just say maybe they've had some kind of like one of those big ships leaking oil in the Gulf of Mexico. I mean, I'm making this up, but they don't know it has happened. So they don't know yet the extent of the leak. They don't know yet perhaps what really caused it. Was it an explosion? Was it somebody making it? Was it a terrible human error? What was it? Maybe they don't have all the facts yet, but to come out and give some kind of reassurance to the world that they're on top of it and that they're doing their very best to take care of it, to understand what happened, to make sure that they are controlling the outcome as best they can, and that they're going to be very diligent about giving you the correct information. You've got to create a sense of trust. Most people don't do that. And I think it's important that you deal with the media in a very transparent way. Now, there could be something there that you don't want the world to know, but I'm going to guarantee you sooner or later it's going to come out. It just is. In our world today, you can't hide things. So somebody somehow knows the truth and they're going to tell it sooner or later. So get your act together. When you find out something, tell the truth, because otherwise it's going to make you look really bad. So that's the number one thing. The number two thing is envision in your head as you prepare. What's the worst possible question somebody's going to ask me? And this is true of any interview, anytime, anywhere. What is the worst question? Then create the answer. Know what it is so that if they don't ask, they do ask it, you're prepared and you're not going to look like that deer in the headlight. And if they don't ask it, you're home free in that moment. We talk a lot about pivoting back to the message that you want to give. And maybe you're going to have journalists coming at you saying, but how bad is the leak? How bad is that leak? How much is it going to affect the wildlife? How are you going to stop it? And again, I don't have all the answers yet, but I promise you, we will get them to you at the moment that we can. We're doing our very best to control this situation. We've learned from things that have happened in the past to other companies. We've always taken every safety precaution. This has come to us as a total and absolute surprise and unanticipated event. And that means we have to find out and get to the bottom of it so we can stop it and do what we can to help, to save whatever it is, save lives, save the environment, etc. So it's crucially important that you create a timeline and tell them, we will be back to you in an hour with more information, or we'll be back to you in a half a day. I've got people that have now gone to the site and they will be able to give us something in 45 minutes or whatever it is. Make a promise and stick to it. But the more transparent you are, the easier the media will be on you because they believe they can trust you.
There's certainly a long history of examples where CEOs have maybe tried to obfuscate the truth. And if it comes out later that they knew the whole time, then that's going to do more damage than the event itself.
Of course it does. And those guys are guys or women are out of a job pretty quickly. They've lost everything. Their stakeholders are like, oh, who's running this company? And the public is another cursed name. So it's important. That transparency has never been more important than it is right now.
Yeah. So I took a few key takeaways there. I'd love to share them back to you, Jane, and see how I go with this. So the first one was that the journalist is not out to get you. They're there to get the story. The second one was to be transparent. Share all of the things that you know to be true and be aware that if it comes out later that you knew something and you didn't share it, then that's not going to look good. Prepare for what would be the worst possible question that they're going to ask. And if that question comes out, well, you're ready. And if it doesn't come out, then at least you were prepared for it. And then the fourth one was, my takeaway was if you don't know the answer to one of the questions they ask, it's okay to say, I don't know that yet, but we will find out. And what you're there to show them is that you've got your finger on the pulse, that you're taking it seriously and you are taking proactive action, that your hands are on that steering wheel. How does that sit with you in terms of a summary?
That's very good. Because that last thing, if they're asking you a question and you speculation is just a no-no. You don't even go down that path, because somebody could take that and say, oh, we just found out what happened, when it's not true. At least it's not true yet. We don't know it yet to be the truth. And the other thing is, I think you need to understand that people that are listening or watching, they're not stupid. The audience is not stupid. And the audience, if you say, I don't know the answer yet, but I am going to find out. When you do that, people, they have a little bit of empathy and a little bit of compassion. Like, what would I do in that situation where something terrible happened? And so, and it can be surprising to you that if they believe, that keyword trust, if they believe that there's some trust there that's coming out to them, then that's the moment when the audience it's not that they're on your side, but they're feeling much better towards your ability to handle the situation.
Yeah, and that trust building is so key, because then they're not going to maybe second guess everything that you say from that moment onwards, because it's clear that you're sharing what you do know, you're not speculating on what you don't know, and you're telling them that you'll come back to them when you do.
Right, exactly. I was working with somebody recently who's with the big utility company, and they had, it was after a hurricane, and he started out by saying, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing. Instead of, and that's the other thing that I thought was really crucially wrong with the way this guy approached it, is my first response would have been, we would be showing empathy and sympathy for people who'd lost their homes or lost their lives and their families, saying the thing that's most important here is that we need to empathize and sympathize with those who have suffered so greatly from whatever this tragedy is. And we also are worried, we're concerned about the safety of our own people, our own teams that are out there in the middle of this hurricane. They're human beings doing their job too, but we're not going to put them in harm's way. So people first, always put people first, then get to where you are with the actual issue and what's going on. But I just said to this guy, because he put that at the end, I said, if you'd started with that, it would have been a lot easier to deliver some of the news you had to deliver.
That's a powerful lesson there, Jane. What I have seen recently, similar to that, but has gone wrong, you said empathy for the people that are impacted. We've seen a few CEOs in recent times come out and they've been sharing news about job losses, and they've shown emotion on screen, but it feels almost like crocodile tears, or they go, oh, poor me, instead of the impacted people that have lost their job. So how do we make sure that showing that empathy right at the start of the interview or the message that you're delivering, how do you make sure that they understand that, yes, this is empathy for the people that are impacted, and it doesn't backfire of, oh, I can't believe that person said that?
Well, what's interesting about the world of television, which is the world I know really well, the world of video of any sort, and of course, a lot of our news these days comes from video. It's also true with radio or audio, when it's just audio. It's about your body language, and it's about the way you use your voice, and it's the eye contact that you have, the authenticity that you show. Firing people or laying people off for economic reasons and you have no other choice. Those are tough decisions to make. And at the same time, what's owed to, the business to make the business survive, what's owed to the stakeholders, those are tough decisions. But again, it's about being authentic. It's the way that you look at the camera or the audience that's there. It's the way that you have to be careful with the words that you choose, but even more careful with the way that you look. Now, that means somber tones. That means having a real conversation versus being like a robot. I mean, nobody wants to stand out and say, yeah, we just laid off 35,000 people because we had no choice, or the company's going to go under. And either we're going to continue to make cars or we're not. So it's the only solution we have right now. But you've got to deliver it in a way that says there were no choices. And what goes through people's minds, unfortunately, will be, well, what about you, Mr. or Mrs. CEO? Are you taking a pay cut to help with this? I mean, that would be a question I would ask. So you might think about, as a leader, what would be the right thing for you to do that would make it be super authentic? Maybe you should give back a bonus. Maybe you should think about the things that you would do that are going to make you seem like a real human being who cares. And it's never been more important than it is during the time of COVID, because so many people were afraid of what was going to happen to themselves, and to show that care and empathy and compassion for the people that work for you who are suffering. I mean, everybody suffered. Everybody, the people who run the companies and, the person at the lowest on the totem pole, we all suffered equally during COVID. We all had fear. We all had trepidation. We all didn't know what was going on. And I think that kind of that feeling of universal concern is something that we needed to share. And the CEOs and leaders who did that well are the people whose companies are really thriving today.
Yeah. In fact, in some respects, they've turned adversity into opportunity because people warmed to that. They went, oh, okay, here's a leader that actually genuinely cares about their people. And it becomes a place where you might want to go and work. So the two takeaways I took there, Jane, was congruence. That was the first word that popped into my mind. So congruence with everything, your tone, your body language, your facial expressions, and then the key word of authenticity. It's not a performance. You're there to be your authentic self. So if you are having a tough time because you're laying off these people, express that, but express the care for the people, all right, and make it authentic.
Yeah, put yourself in their shoes, and that will get you a very long ways. If you can think about a person who's now got to go home and tell their spouse, I just got laid off. I don't know how we're going to survive over the next few months. So put yourself in those shoes and think about what the effect and the impact is going to be and how you can help them. And honestly, the more that you do that, the better off everyone surrounding you is going to be.
Yeah, powerful, Jane. All right, so we've been through a lot around crisis management or sharing bad news with the media. I'd love to hear your advice. 30 years in the industry, there's a lot of companies out there that have got good news to share. They're working on projects that have got purpose and meaning. They believe that they're having an impact on the world, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of them would say that they struggle to get good news coverage. How do we, in organizations that are out there with good things to share, how do we get, what advice would you give them so that they can get some even airplay compared to, let's say, the bad news story?
So there are so many outlets. The media is completely diversified now, which means that don't be afraid to go talk on podcasts. Don't be afraid to do stories with independent journalists that are going to put it up on social media. Don't be afraid to do your own videos that you then put in social media yourself because they get picked up. And that's all part of also creating a really authentic brand. And we don't want to talk about it in a boastful way, but we want to talk about it in a way that says, we just completed this project. And as a result of that, we've now, whatever the end result is, be grateful for it and share that good news. And if you share it across many different platforms and many different media outlets, it will get picked up by the big ones that you might want to be on. But those big ones aren't as important as they used to be, because especially if you're talking, when you take, like, I deal with three things in my work: audience, what are you saying, and how are you delivering it, right? So think about the audience that you want to reach. Who do you really want to reach? Do you want to reach consumers? Do you want to reach peers, other kinds of businesses? Do you want to reach potential investors? Do you want to reach, what's your ultimate goal? What's your purpose? Who do you want to have this information? And then target specific places where you know you're going to get that audience. Now, for example, if you're trying to talk to Gen Zers, you're not going to get much by going on, let's say, the NBC nightly news, because those people do not watch it. Now, if you're trying to get the baby boomer generation, you bet you want to be on all the big television networks that are around the world. But every kind of generation has their own place they're getting their information from. So that means you need to be completely diverse in the way you present it. And I urge all of my clients, create some videos, do some fun stuff on TikTok, do some things across all social media platforms. Don't be afraid. Don't be stuck in the mud about, I've got to be on this show, because it doesn't matter anymore. Get your message out there that you want delivered in unusual ways, and you even get attention for that. So it's really thinking about, who do I want to reach? And once you figure out who you want to reach, then you figure out, well, what are they watching, listening, reading? Then you can do it through that. And also do it on your own website and do it on your own, all of your social media platforms, because it'll work. So getting good news out, because journalists just don't want to tell bad news. They want to tell stories. So think about the angles that would make something a really good story. What is an example of that? Is maybe you've created some new product that is delivering in ways that you didn't anticipate. And what does that product do? Maybe it's something that provides different solution for some kind of a medical issue. Or maybe it's got a new kind of shoe that will make you run faster. Or it's got whatever it is. Then just make sure you're talking about it in a way that's interesting and fun and exciting and intriguing, because it will get picked up. But you got to do that hard work. There's never been more opportunity to get good stories out there than there is right now. There really hasn't.
That's brilliant advice, Jane. So I'm going to say I took 4 takeaways from that. The first one was, who is your audience and where do they hang out? And where they hang out may not be where you get your news from. So think about your audience and where do they hang out? What is your message and how are you going to deliver it? And that last one is wrap it in a story or a narrative that makes it interesting. I mean, we are in the world, rightly or wrongly now, in the world of edutainment. So yes, people are after information, but they're looking for it in a more engaging manner, which is where the power of storytelling or a powerful narrative would come in. So do the work to go, okay, how can we get this message across wrapped in a story that will be relatable to my target audience? And don't be shy about looking at all of the different mechanisms and platforms that are out there.
I mean, don't think that anything is going to be, oh no, I'm not going to do that one, but you'll be shocked. I'm telling you, you'll be shocked. The other thing is you've got to keep it brief. And the reason I say that is the attention span in most places, certainly in the United States, is now about 8 seconds. Now, what is that? What do I mean by that? You haven't completely lost an audience because they're still listening or watching, but they might be having that second conversation in their head, like, how much time do I have left in this podcast? Or where's my next meeting? How am I going to get there? There's just a little, second conversation in the back of the head, which means you then have to engage people quickly and easily. And if you do something that will get them going, oh, I got to watch this, then you hit a home run. And by the way, you can do the same thing across so many different platforms. Just because you use it on Facebook doesn't mean you can't do some form of that on TikTok and can't do the same thing on LinkedIn and can't do the same thing on all the other ones that are out there and can't tell the same story in the Wall Street Journal or can't tell the same story on CNBC. I mean, you can use the same story in the same kind of, you use that word, would you call it
edutainment?
Yeah. So that's got that entertainment part of it. In today's world, we're overstimulated and we like to be entertained. So you can use the same story. Sometimes you're just doing it slightly differently in terms of the time or, how the fun factor or whatever it is. But it's still the same story and it doesn't matter. It's a different audience.
What I'm taking away there, I'd love to test this with you, Jane. So we live in a distracted world, an 8-second world, if you like. So what I believe we're now competing for is not airspace anymore. We're now competing for thought space. So how am I going to engage my audience in such a way that they actually stop, think and reflect about what I'm saying? Not just, oh yeah, that was on in the background when I was doing something else. So you're really trying to captivate them so that they stop and really pause for a moment to give you some reflective thinking space to go, oh, I think that's important. And then if you can tap into capturing their attention and then capture some emotion in some kind of storytelling, they're then going to remember it and do something about it. So thinking about the way you want people to think, the way you want people to feel and what you want them to do about it, and then wrap that up in a way that captivates their attention, and you might have a chance of getting some of that thought space. How does that sit with you?
That's absolutely correct. And the one word you just used in there was feel. I love using this Maya Angelou quote in every single one of my trainings, which is, people will forget what you did. They'll forget what you said. They will never forget how you made them feel. And you want to make them feel, because if they feel something, they will remember it. And they'll say, I got to check this out. I got to do a little research. I got to go buy that, or I got to go think about that, or you've persuaded them because of the way you made them feel. And as far back as Aristotle's time, because he's considered the father of communications, he's the one who first talked about that in how do you make people feel and then create understanding, pathos.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. Thank you, Jane. Really powerful there. I want to go on to the video part of it now, because we are talking about creating your own videos and getting out there on different platforms. There are people, communicators out there that may be actually quite comfortable on a stage presence. They might be really good in a group environment and then stick that camera lens down their nose and they freeze into a robot or whatever you want to call it, right? How do you get people past that, Jane?
Well, by the way, there's a thing called glossophobia. So glossophobia is fear of public speaking. And 87% of the people have it at one time or another in their life. They get it because they'll get butterflies in their stomach. They'll start to sweat. Sometimes it's because maybe they had to speak at the last moment. Maybe it's because they're speaking before the big boss and they've never had to do that before. Maybe it's because there's something else that's happened in their life and they're quote unquote freaked out. Whatever the reason is, in that moment, you all of a sudden lose your train of thought. You forget almost everything and you become so fearful you don't know what to do. So with having said that, there are cures that can be pretty simple. One of them is to focus on your purpose. There are a ton of studies out there that show if you focus why you're there, why you're talking, that gets rid of all the rest of it. People get fearful because we think we're being judged. And the truth is, you're not being judged. People aren't judging you and saying, oh, I hate her hair or something like that. They're there because they want to hear what you have to say. And if you can focus back on that, it really helps when you focus on your purpose. A second thing that helps, if you breathe, it's very simple. I tell people to do a little breathing exercise before they start, which is breathe in 3 counts, hold it for 3, breathe out for 3, and do it 3 times. And that really helps. It gets our diaphragm deep breathing, and it helps a lot in making us stable. Then there's nothing like great prep. If you know what you're going to say and you've really gone through it, you will be in a much better place because you know what you've got. Also, never memorize, because if you memorize, you're going down a rabbit hole when you forget a line. All of a sudden you're stuck and you don't know what to say next. I believe in putting little bullet points on a piece of paper and have that paper in front of you so you can look at it if you need to. And then lastly, take your phone and practice. Just put the phone up, practice what you're going to say, get used to seeing yourself on camera, get used to hearing your voice. Look at what you're doing on that, that video that you're creating on your phone. What do you like about it and what don't you like about it? Get rid of what you don't like and use what you do like, and just keep doing it. And the more you do that, the more it becomes familiar and almost fun. I believe that there's a little performer in each side of each one of us, and that we can get to this place if you follow that simple advice. Remember that you're there. This has to do with purpose, but it's even deeper than that. You're there because you're the expert on that given subject at that given moment. And if you think about yourself as being the expert, and so what if you forget to say something? Nobody knows what you forgot. So what if maybe it doesn't come across as beautifully as you want? You're still there because you are the expert, and it's just a conversation.
All right, so I heard 5 things there, all very powerful, Jane, and really great stuff. So the first thing around focusing on the purpose, you're there for a reason. And if you focus on the purpose, it's very hard to go wrong with that. You spoke about breathing, and that's something that I forget to do sometimes, but I think it's very powerful. So the breathing, the preparation, but it's not preparing a script. It's preparing your subject, and you do know your subject. I love this idea about practicing with your smartphone. We used to say practice in front of the mirror, but we're all carrying smartphones these days, so you can see what you look like on camera. You can get used to the sound of your voice, and then this remembering you're the expert. I just want to add one thing on the remembering you're the expert. People are actually only going to remember about 3 to 5 things that you say anyway. You are not there in a 15-minute period tell them every single thing that you know, because they're not going to remember that anyway. So just focus on 3 key messages, and that's hard to go wrong from there. How does that sit with you, Jane?
That's absolutely perfect. There's a thing called messaging math. And so if you say, what's 9 times 1? You're going to say it's
9.
Well, in messaging math, it's 0. If you have 9 key messages, they will remember, and you say them each once, they will never remember them.
I love it.
What's 3 times 3?
I would assume 9.
But in this case, it's 1, maybe 2. So what I mean by that is if you've got 3 messages and you deliver them 3, you incorporate it and kind of refer back to it 3 times during the course of a presentation or whatever you're doing, people will remember 1, maybe 2 of them. And that's a home run, by the way. So what you're talking about is how you're putting together your messaging, which is a whole nother ballgame. But walk in the door or get on the Zoom, whatever you're doing, with the notion of what's 1 key message you want people to walk away with. And then make sure that you have emphasized that throughout. You can't get everything in. And the moment you try, people will remember absolutely nothing. And by the way, when you tell stories are 22 times more memorable than just giving facts. Stories are retold.
Brilliant, Jane. And people do remember stories because they remember how they made them feel and come back to the emotion element of that again. So I just love this. And I'm just going to put some reminders of different things that you've said. You know, we live in an 8-second world. We're competing for people's thought space. This messaging math, 9 times 1 equals 0, 3 times 3 equals 1. So just focus on that one thing and remember this 8-second world. You're there to capture their attention. You're there to make them feel something, and then they'll walk away with that one key message that you wanted them to hear. That's really powerful, Jane.
That means you're a winner.
Exactly, because how many times does someone walk away and they'll say, oh, yeah, I went to a presentation today. It was good. Yeah, it was good. Yeah. What was the message? Can't remember. And even if there was a call to action, there's no action because they don't remember, right? So, yeah, brilliant, Jane. I've absolutely adored this interview. This has been a great honour to have you on the show, Jane. I'd love to now go to our rapid round. These are the same 4 questions that we ask all of our guests, and I'm really curious to hear your answers to all of these. So the first one, Jane Hanson, is what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
That everybody is the same. I used to be afraid when I would go out to interview a head of state or some very important person because I would think, oh, they're so much smarter than me. They're so much different than me. They're completely, I'd get imposter syndrome sometimes. And the bottom line is everybody's the same. We are the same. We have the hopes and dreams and fears and everything. So really don't allow that fear that somebody is better than you. Sure, they may be smarter, or sure, they may have more wisdom, but at the heart and soul of all of us, we are all the same.
All right. So as a human being that's in front of you, so park the imposter syndrome at the door and just have a conversation is what I'm hearing from that. Now, we didn't go into this through the interview, so I'm now going to go on a small tangent for a moment. I did read that you were interviewing Desmond Tutu when he found out that he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he felt emotional at that time. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, he was in New York to make a presentation, make a speech at the UN. And so I was interviewing him in a park in Lower Manhattan. And I had several things to do that day. I was really busy, and journalists can kind of be a bit snappy, like, no, I got to finish. And the people that were with him stopped the interview. And when they stopped the interview, I said, I'm almost done. And they said, no, you really want us to stop. So he walked away and they told him, and he came back with tears in his eyes. And, the people that were with him said, we've just told him that he's won the Nobel Peace Prize for, of course, all of the work he did about apartheid in South Africa, as for all of his life. And so I looked at him, and I get chills still to this day when I think about it, because as he was talking, and he said, it's only because of the people, though they're at the heart and soul of this, and to help them create the kind of lives that they deserve and that they can have, and how we needed to change that world in South Africa at that time. He said, it's all for them. And every single thing I've ever done was all for them. And I went to South Africa this past March, and he died, I believe, in January, or at least he died within the last year. And I had so hoped that I would be able to meet up with him again. But I saw the results of what his work had done. And it was just one of those moments that I'll never forget.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. And once again, the emotion of that moment, not just what happened, but the emotion of that moment. That leads me to a curious question, and that is, of all of those world leaders and heads of state, etc., that you've interviewed, which one has changed your perspective the most? Like, who was the most inspirational person in terms of getting to know them both on and off camera?
That is a really difficult question for me, because there have been so many people. I do have to say that right after when we had all of these Americans that were held hostage in Iran for, 450 some days. And obviously in the United States, everybody was totally very upset and et cetera, et cetera. And then Ronald Reagan became president. And I think it was his kind of down home sense of, we're just going to get this done and we're going to bring those people home. And they came home within days of him being elected and becoming president. And I interviewed many of those hostages because they were brought to New York, including some of the women that I met in the ladies' room at a restaurant that they were all at. And the emotion and what that meant that they were coming home made me think about Ronald Reagan as a total inspiration for the things that he did. The Berlin Wall came down during his watch. There were so many things that happened. And it was just that kind of, shucks, we're just going to do this sort of feeling that was very non-pretentious. Now, people could say he was an actor, so he knew how to do that. But I found him to be very inspiring. Obviously Desmond Tutu was amazing, absolutely amazing to have had that moment with him. There've just been so many people over the years, and some of them have been just ordinary people that something happened to, that then went on to write books and share messages that helped change other people's lives. People who had some kind of devastation, maybe it was a child was killed or something had happened to them. They had some disease and now they've come forth and they're doing everything in their power to fight for it. It's hard for me to pick just one. It's almost impossible.
Thank you for sharing what you did share. And with that Ronald Reagan story, he does come across as kind of very relaxed and all that kind of stuff, but very mission and purpose driven is what I heard there, coming back to purpose again.
Which I think the United States really desperately needed at that time.
Yeah, good point. All right, coming back to our rapid round. It's not rapid anymore because my curiosity got the better of me. But anyway, what's your favourite book?
Oh, my favorite book. Oh, that's also another tough question. Usually it's, one I'm just reading. I'm very spiritual and I love to read books that are done by the masters of Hinduism or things Gandhi has written, stuff like that. I can't pick just one. I also like to read the Bible. I like to pull a lot of things from there, things that I can apply to my daily life. And I think that's really good. But for the most part, the books, although I read a lot of spy mysteries, I love a guy named Daniel Silva, Israeli spy master that he writes about and who's also a painter. He's got this whole art thing on one side and then he's got his spy life on the other, the thrilling part. There's two opposite ends of the spectrum. So that's really super fun reads for me when I want to just dissolve and get away from the world. I'm an avid reader. And when I was on television, I would interview maybe an author a week and I would read their books every week. And sometimes the authors would be stunned that I would read the book. Let me just give you one more thought, because I just interviewed Indra Nooyi, who ran PepsiCo for so many years, and she's just written a book. It's about a year old. And there are some tremendous lessons for leaders, because this is about leaders in that book. Now, Indra was born and raised in India and came to the U.S. to rise to this unbelievable position, first woman to do that. And she has incredible leadership tips, but she created something called Performance with a Purpose at PepsiCo, and she talked a lot about it. And I think that book describes how she came to that. One of the other things that she discovered is when she got this job, the big job at PepsiCo, and she went back home to India and her mother was still alive and her mother had kind of a little reception for her. And so all these people that she didn't know, that Indra didn't know, but her mother did from the community, and she was born and raised in Madras, India, came into the home. They're not really talking to Indra other than to say congratulations, but they're going to her mother and they're saying, what a job you've done. Look at this daughter of yours, blah, blah, blah. And she came back from that experience and she said, I need to congratulate the parents of my top executives, the parents of the people that I work for. And she started to write them all letters, handwritten letters, to thank them for their children and what they bring to the company. And one of my bosses at NBC did that to my mother, and I will never forget it. I'd won some award and he had framed pictures sent, and along with it, he wrote her a beautiful letter about me. My mother, it brings tears to my eyes still, because in that moment, the letter wasn't about me. It was about her job raising me. And that leadership lesson, it's such a great one to think about.
I just love it. And I love the gratitude of that. I love every element of that story. And I'm definitely going to look into Indira's book. That sounds amazing. That's going to be on my holiday reading list for sure.
Yeah, it should be. It's a great book.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to look into that for sure, Jane. What's your favorite quote?
The Maya Angelou one I used before. People will forget what you said, they'll forget what you did, but they will never forget how you make them feel. It is, to me, that is communication 101. That's what it is. I couldn't dream of something that fits better into how we need to treat one another, talk to one another, no matter who we are, whatever company we're leading, whatever business we're in, whatever's going on in our personal life, whoever we are, it just manifests itself across every spectrum.
It's one of my favorites too, Jane. I'm thinking about it all the time. It's really powerful. And final question, I'm sure there's going to be people in the audience that have been absolutely enthralled with our interview today, and people that are sitting there thinking, yeah, you know what? I do need some help with either my media relations or my videos or my presentation skills. How do people get in contact with you if they want to take advantage of your services?
Well, I have a website and it's Jane Hanson, HANSON.com. My email is jane@janehanson.com. So I'm pretty easy to reach and I love hearing from people. And I particularly love hearing from people who are listening to you because maybe I've touched on something that will help them. And I'd love to know that. But I also would love to know what other thoughts they might have for me about, or questions they might have about their own leadership abilities or the thought leadership thing. Because I like to grow and evolve, and I like to have more stories to tell, and maybe they can give me some.
Good one, Jake. Yeah, there's a double win there. And, I picked that up from the very first thing you said when you went from Canby to New York and you were, I'm going to say that you were very brash and confident, but you were also humble and you were curious to ask the veterans in the industry about how does this all work? And that showed a growth mindset from the outset. And I can see that here you are sitting in front of us today, a 30-year career later, and you still have that same growth mindset looking to learn new things. So that's absolutely wonderful, Jane.
If you don't have that, I don't think you're living, right?
All right, brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jane. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today and I can't wait to share it with the audience. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mixbeers.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.